name is Erica Stanton. You need to understand why I'm posting this. The following are replicas of two posts that a friend of mine by the name of Alex Garvey made on a comics forum we both spent time on together. The posts were made in one of the general chat sections of the site. Both posts were swiftly taken down soon after they had been posted. I was in the process of replying to the second when it was taken down, so I could copy and paste the whole text, which I decided to do given how strange it was. The first two lines are from the first post, as best I remember them. The wording may not be exactly right, but it's as close as I can get. I need to write this down. I need to write this down before it. There is a gap of 4 hours between this post and the next. It happened again. I don't even remember hitting the button to submit that first post. The gaps in my memory are getting worse. All started with my friend's husband. Elena had been married to Nolan for a while, since before I met her, in fact. They were both the nicest people you could hope to meet, though Nolan was a little shy around new people. He kept to himself mostly and didn't talk much, but when you got to know him, you saw that he had a good heart. He would always make time to do little acts of kindness for people, even those he didn't know. Whenever he passed any homeless on the street, he'd always give them a few bucks. He was always happy to be the first to offer a ride home to friends who needed it, and to be the designated driver when we were having a few drinks. Anyway, one day, while I was talking to Elena, she told me that Nolan had started acting weird. Ever since he brought that ugly thing home, she said. Now, this kind of piqued my curiosity, so I asked her what she was talking about. She explained that about 2 weeks previously, Nolan had come home after a long day at the office with something under his arm she'd never seen before. It had looked, she said, like a laptop, but a laptop that had been partially dismantled and taken apart in random sections. And there were various extra idiots that didn't seem to do anything. Wires and things plugged into it that she didn't recognize. She'd asked about it, and he'd simply replied that it was for work. Nolan worked in computer programming, so this seemed like a reasonable enough explanation, and she hadn't thought much of it until a few days later. That was when she came home from shopping to find him just sitting at the thing, staring at a bright blue screen. Occasionally, he would type a few things into it, just gibberish as far as she could tell, random letters and numbers in no real sequence. Then he'd stare at the screen until a line of the same would appear in reply, which she guessed must mean that it was connected to the net, except that she'd noticed later that day, when Nolan was still typing away, that the modem was switched off. She told me that this had been going on for a while now, and that whenever she tried to talk to Nolan about it, he just looked confused for a few moments, like he genuinely didn't even know what she was referring to when she asked about the device. Then he would just go back to saying that it was for works, and wouldn't talk anymore about it. This sounded seriously strange to me, so I asked her if she would be able to snap a picture of the screen while he was typing, using her iPhone or something, and then send it to me. I told her how it sounded almost like Nolan and whoever he was talking to were communicating in some kind of code, and that a friend of mine was kind of a genius at cracking those things. She agreed, clearly concerned about her husband. She told me that he had been increasingly distant a lot of the time, followed by moments when he was almost too outgoing. Not the usual shy man she knew. She looked genuinely worried about him, so I got the feeling that this wasn't just someone making a big deal over nothing, and that there might be something wrong here. We got a photo of the screen with a line of code on it a few days later, and my friend Jack got to work trying to decipher it. Well, he did most of the work, to be honest. Okay, all of the work, but I supervised. It took him a while, but finally he figured it out. What he found really didn't make much sense to me. Nolan's line of code read awaiting. The reply from whomever he was talking to read, wear only white for the remainder of the day. There was an acknowledged from Nolan, and then that was it. When I told Elena about this, she seemed even more unsettled by the whole thing. She told me that soon after she'd taken that picture, Nolan had indeed gotten up, gone to the bedroom, and changed into an all-white outfit, white shoes, socks, pants, and a shirt with a white belt. He normally preferred darker colors, mostly black and gray, so she'd taken note of it as being odd. And odder still was that she honestly couldn't remember seeing the outfit he was wearing in their cupboard at any point before. This went on for a while. Nolan would act oddly, behaving or speaking in ways that weren't normal for him. He would often seem distant or distracted, and he started coming home late more and more often. At one point, he came home with cuts all over his hands, like scratch marks of some kind. He didn't seem to know how he'd gotten them. Something else that troubled her was the way the device never seemed to run out of power. Over the weekend, it would be on 24/7, but it was never plugged in to charge. It simply kept on running throughout the day. Whatever battery it ran on never ran out of juice. And no matter what room of the house he was in, when a line of code appeared on the screen, Nolan would come running, like Pavlov's dog at the sound of the bell. It was a week later that Elena called me, in tears and sounding frantic. She told me that Nolan had disappeared. She'd woken up in the middle of the night, and he'd been gone. She'd tried his phone, and there had been no answer. She called the office, their friends, his relatives, her relatives, nothing. She'd called the police, but they said that not enough time had passed to report him as missing, and she'd said that when she'd come down into the living room, that damn things had been sitting open on the table, the blue screen casting its dim light against a sofa that looked like someone had been sitting in it until recently. I and Jack offered to take a look at the device to try and see if there was anything on there that could give some hint as to what the hell was going on here. She was so desperate for some clue, any clue as to what had happened to Nolan, that she agreed, and we picked it up from her place the next day. The police wouldn't do anything until he'd been missing for a few days anyway, so we figured we would take a crack at it, and if we couldn't find anything, we'd hand it over to them when they began officially searching for Nolan, if he hadn't come back before that, of course. We found that every interaction between Nolan and whoever he had been talking to was viewable simply by hitting the up cue and scrolling up through the various lines of code when it finally wouldn't go up any further. We figured this was the start, or as close to it as possible. And so Jack got to work translating. While I wrote down what he said, I didn't know what we were going to find. I don't think there's any way either of us could have guessed. The first message was simple. It read, "Hello, Nolan. Please stand by." It then said, "When asked about this device, you are to say only that it is for work. We shall supply further instruction if necessary." The next one was presumably from his unknown contact as well. It read, "Eat only vegetables today." It's another instruction. Jack went on to translate the next. Nolan would indicate that he was at the device with a simple "I am here," and then an order would follow. "Slow down by 5 miles at the first green light you see after work. Kiss your wife only on the cheek for the next 24 hours. Do not smile until told otherwise." I jotted them down, wondering what on earth all this was. Nolan had been having some kind of kinky master-slave affair behind his wife's back. Was this part of some really weird reality show he'd been taking part in? Some kind of hidden camera stunt? What the hell was all of this? Then Jack went quiet. He swallowed hard, and he read the next instruction. "Eat a child's skin." I turned to look at him, and at this point, I was king terrified. This had been creeping me out the more we'd gone on, and I genuinely thought and hoped that this had to be him messing with me. I even said, "You made that one up," and I wanted it to be in a casual, joking kind of way. It came out more like I was pleading with him, begging him to tell me he'd made it up. From the look on his face, either he hadn't or he was a much better actor than I'd ever thought he was. The next instructions we translated were more mundane nonsense, orders about what to wear, how fast to walk, what route to take to work, and what to eat. I almost made myself believe that there had been a mistranslation and that Jack had gotten it wrong. Then he read out the next one. "Remove the eyes and tongue of the first homeless man you see today." Now I'm pretty sure most people would be creeped out by that. But me, I wasn't just unsettled. I was feeling physically sick. I could remember reading a news story not long ago about the brutal slaying of a man believed to be one of the various homeless people that occupied the city. He'd been found in a shop doorway, in a pool of blood, with his eyes gouged out and his tongue removed. The remaining instructions were all mostly everyday ones, not that it mattered at this point. Some morbid curiosity made us press on, though, and scattered throughout were ones like, strike the second stray animal you see before 6 p.m.s, and destroy the third vending machine that you walk past. Then came the final line of text. It simply read, "We are coming. Wait outside for collection." And then it stopped. That was the last message that Nolan had received, the night he vanished from his home. Jack and I had no goddamn idea what to do with all this. This hadn't answered our questions. It had raised even more. What the hell was this thing? Who was Nolan talking to? Was this some sick joke, some kind of ridiculously elaborate prank that he had pulled on us? Jack said he had to get a drink and headed to the fridge. While he grabbed us some beers, I glanced at the device, staring at the glowing blue screen. And that's when I noticed all the text that had been there before had vanished. Just gone, leaving the screen completely blank. A new line of code appeared, and somehow, and I have no idea how, I could read it. "Hello, Alex. Please stand by." That was 3 weeks ago. Jack has just disappeared off the face of the earth, and I don't know what scares me more, that I don't know what happened to him, or that I think some part of me does. I know that I get instructions from that thing regularly. I have whole hours, even days, of my life that are just one big blank where I can't remember a single damn thing that I've done. I've got bruises and scratches all over me. I come home some nights, and I'm wearing different clothes than what I left in, and my old clothes are gone. There are faint stains in the boot of my car, and a horrible smell. My head hurts all the time, and when I sleep, I see something. When I wake up, I can't remember what happened, but I know it was bad. My body feels different. Everything feels wrong. Everything feels strange, I think. The post ended here. I've not heard from or seen Alex since then. I don't know where he is, but I think I'm going to find out. Remember how I told you that it was important that you know my name? I went to Alex's apartment about a week after we lost all contact. The door was unlocked, and in his bedroom, on the desk, was what looked like a weird laptop with a blue screen. 2 new lines of text appeared on it, written in a code I shouldn't have been able to read. "Hello, Erica, please stand by." I'm a chronic sleep talker. Always have been. Everyone who's ever slept in the same house as me will tell you that. My parents, siblings, friends, and especially my exes, they're the ones who got an earful. It was something we'd laugh about in the morning because most of what I'd say would be incoherent or nonsensical. Some of my famous lines included, "There's too many helicopters in the pool," and "My balloon's on the wrong foot." It never bothered anyone around me. My friends and family pretty much just got a kick out of it. One day at work, the subject of sleeping came up. My coworkers threw stories back and forth about some of their weirdest dreams. I chimed in with my sleep-talking antics. Everyone laughed as I rattled off some of the crazier shit I've said while zonked. One of my coworkers, Bill, really busted a gut. After he finished hyperventilating, he told me that I should set up a voice recorder while I sleep so I can play it back at work every morning. Honestly, I didn't think it was a bad idea. This is that night. I downloaded a decent voice recording app on my phone and placed it on my nightstand before I went to bed. Being single and living alone, I had no way of knowing what I said in my sleep anymore, so I was looking forward to hearing what it would pick up. It would be a humorous way to start my otherwise dull mornings. For 2 months, I recorded a lot of great stuff. One night in particular, I kept screaming, almost as if I were running from something in my dream. But after a few minutes, I said, "Bad fridge." I couldn't stop laughing at that one. Neither could my coworkers when I showed them. Eventually, the app picked up something unsettling. Listening to the audio for any trace of funny banter I might find, I heard a loud bang. It sounded like a door being slammed shut with great force. Hearing that, my heart sank. I wondered if an intruder had made their way into my home. My house is a small cottage on the outskirts of town. I was able to get it at a great price due to its location and age. As such, some of its components are antiquated. I knew after hearing the recording that the only two doors sturdy enough to make that loud of a thud were those of the attic and the basement. Basements and attics have always freaked me out. I never liked to go near them as a kid, and I still don't as an adult. They kind of terrify me. The ones in my house even more so. Something about them being old made them all the more sinister. Despite my fear, I had to make sure no one was in the house. Well, I got out of bed and headed straight for the basement, as that was the door closest to my bedroom. I hesitantly opened the door and descended into my home's depths. I was nervous, but I was desperate for some peace of mind. The basement was empty. I quickly ran back up to the first floor and proceeded to journey upstairs. Once I reached the attic door, I froze. As much as basements make my skin crawl, I find attics to be far worse. Maybe it was because they were always a big unknown to me. I had only ever been in an attic once my whole life, and that was to help my dad unload some Christmas decorations. Even then, I was spooked. It's because of my phobia. I installed a deadbolt on the door when I moved in. It sounds foolish, but hey, it helps me sleep at night. Looking at the door, I noticed that the deadbolt was still locked. An intruder could have gone in and then relocked it on their way out. But at least I knew they weren't in there anymore. This was my excuse not to go inside. I went back downstairs and put the noise out of my mind. Forgetting all about the loud bang, I continued to record at night in the hopes of catching more sleep talking. I did, but it wasn't of the hilarious, absurd variety. The night after I recorded the noise, the only thing I said the whole night was, "Where are you?" I didn't pay it any mind, as I've said similar things in my sleep before. It wasn't until I heard the following night's recording that I became alarmed. I said the same thing, "Where are you?" Only this time it was followed by a strange static sound. This was odd, but I chalked it up to coincidence and a phone malfunction. I quickly discovered that neither of these things were to blame. Every night after, I got almost the same exact thing. I would ask, "Where are you?" And then I'd get some sort of static interference. I couldn't explain it, and it left me rather frazzled. I showed my coworkers, but they weren't able to offer me any insight. I thought about not recording anymore, but not knowing would make me more uneasy. I wanted to get to the bottom of what was going on. And then one night, I caught something different. Listening to the audio intently, I heard two distinct things. During a 2-minute stretch in the recording, there were footsteps in the background, almost as if someone was pacing. It was very faint, but it was most certainly there. The second thing I heard was me asking the same question, "Where are you?" Only this time I received a response. It was a low whisper, but I could make out what it said. I'm upstairs, deeply unnerved by my findings. I set up the app again the next night. I also took the liberty of setting up 2 digital cameras, one in my room and one facing the attic door. After adjusting the light settings on each, I felt confident in my approach. I didn't have time to deal with this bullshit, so I wanted nothing more than to get it sorted out somehow. Unfortunately for me, it just wasn't that simple. I slept through the night like normal, but I did have a weird dream. In my dream, I was at home. I was sitting on my couch watching TV when I heard a scratching sound coming from upstairs. Naturally, I assumed it was mice, but as I sat there, the noise grew louder and louder. It eventually morphed into a horrendous knocking sound. That's when I got up to investigate. I made my way up to the attic door, and the noises ceased. I stood there for a moment, expecting it to start up again, but it didn't. Complete silence for what felt like a few minutes. Then, without warning, a loud clicking sound broke the tension. The deadbolt had unlocked itself, and that's when I woke up to the sound of my alarm going off. I immediately got up and gathered the cameras, as well as my phone. I was eager to see if they'd captured anything. They did, but it only left me with more questions. Halfway through the audio on both my phone and the camera in my room, I heard once again, "Where are you?" There was no response and no static, but there was a loud bang, just like the one I'd caught before, only more distinct. It was most certainly a door being slammed shut. I quickly grabbed the second camera and began looking through the footage. The attic door never opened. Instead, I heard the bang in the background, ever so faintly. Given the volume in each of the clips, it seemed as though it might have been the basement door. After skimming through the rest of the footage and finding nothing else out of the ordinary, I decided to check the basement again. With a mixture of nerves and adrenaline, I ran over to the basement door and swung it open. I hurried downstairs and turned the light on. I was fed up and a little annoyed, thinking someone was somehow having a laugh at my expense. However, when the room lit up, I was greeted with the familiar sight of an unfurnished basement. It was completely empty. No intruder and no answers. Frustrated, I went off to work and tried to keep my mind off of my odd dilemma. That proved to be a difficult task. I kept playing out different scenarios in my head during the workday, but nothing made sense. The only logical, though somewhat illogical, explanation that I could come up with was that I was being harassed by a spirit. I didn't want to give in to that notion, but I was running out of ideas. I tried to talk with my coworkers again in the hopes that they would tell me there was nothing to worry about. Instead, I received the opposite. One of my coworkers told me to call the cops and have them look through the house for signs of a break-in. Another told me I should stay at a friend's house. Bill told me to abandon the house and run for the hills. He was only joking, but it didn't make me feel any better about the matter. Things took a turn for the bizarre when I arrived home that day. Opening the front door to the cottage, I stepped in and set my jacket down on the couch. I then plopped down in an attempt to unwind. Immediately after sitting, I heard the bang again. It was clear as day. It was the same sound from the audio and footage, but this time I was hearing it in person. I jumped up and looked straight ahead at the basement door. You could see it from the couch. It had been in my line of sight the entire time. Though I hadn't been looking directly at it, I was fairly certain it hadn't moved. Still, the bang definitely came from that direction. Spooked but curious, I decided to check it out. I walked over cautiously and examined the door. There was no indication that it had been slammed shut. The wood around the door was pristine, and the floor below had not been scraped. I opened it and trotted down the old creaky stairs to investigate the basement for the third time. After reaching the bottom, I turned the light on. I expected to see nothing, just as I had before. While scanning the room left to right, nothing is mostly what I saw. After doing a double take, however, I realized that something was amiss. Off in the center of the far wall was a door. This sent a chill up my spine. My basement had no doors, that I was sure of. I knew this before purchasing the place almost a year ago, when I first took the grand tour. I also didn't see the door when I went down there that morning or the other day. It didn't make a lick of sense. I walked towards it, bewildered. I wasn't sure of the door's origins, but I knew that it had to be the cause of the sounds I'd been hearing. There was no other explanation. As I approached the impossibility before me, I realized something that made my skin crawl. I recognized the wood, the design, and the deadbolt. It was the attic door. I didn't want to open it for fear of what might be lurking behind. Instead, I ran upstairs and checked to see if the attic door was still there. The actual one. It was indeed. I then ran back downstairs into the basement, only to find that the door down there had vanished. Had I merely imagined its presence? Thinking I had gone completely mad, I went back upstairs and sat down on the couch. My mind was running haywire, trying to comprehend things, but it eventually gave in to its own weariness. I ended up taking a short nap, and that's when I had another weird dream. This dream was similar to the one I had before. I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard a scratching noise. The only difference was that it was coming from the basement rather than the attic. It too progressed and turned into a voracious knocking that I couldn't ignore. As such, I got up from the couch and went downstairs to put a stop to it. In my dream, the basement was empty. No mysterious door was in sight. That and the knocking and scratching ceased upon my entrance. At my wit's end, I went back upstairs. The sound then returned with a vengeance, only this time it was coming from the attic again. I ran up there as fast as I could, but the noise stopped. I waited. Following the narrative of my previous dream, the deadbolt clicked, signaling that the door had unlocked itself. Unlike my previous dream, however, the door opened up a bit and a hand reached out from within. That's when I woke up. I wrote the first dream off as the byproduct of an overstressed mind, but to have it reoccur, that wasn't ordinary, at least not for me. Between the door in my basement and my strange nightmares, I was a mess. Both perplexed and frightened, I called my friend John. John is an eccentric fellow. He's the kind of guy who believes in UFOs, ghosts, conspiracy theories, the occult, and other things of that nature. Not only does he believe in them, but he also studies them. He knows more about Roswell than I do about myself. Being a skeptic, I always thought the massive amount of information he retained was borderline useless. I changed my mind about that after seeing my attic door pop up in my basement. If anyone could help or at least steer me in the right direction, it was him. I spoke with John for a couple of hours. He was ecstatic after hearing about my experience. He began rattling off all of the different things he thought they might indicate. Some of his theories included a wormhole, a gateway to the other side, and even a glitch. One of the many theories that he subscribes to is that the world we live in is a simulation. He told me that he couldn't be completely certain about what it was without seeing it for himself. Unfortunately, he lives too far away to just stop by and visit. Instead of leaving me empty-handed, John gave me some advice on what to do next. After telling him about the voice I captured and the dreams I'd been having, he started leaning towards the ghost idea. He thought it might be trying to communicate with me. It's because of this. He told me I should set up the voice recorder in the basement and ask the spirit some questions. I could play back the recording after and listen for the voice. John said that I should do it in the attic as well. Though weary of his methods, I told him I'd try them out. After all, I couldn't just sit around and expect the situation to resolve itself. I didn't like the idea of going up into the attic by myself, but I needed to do something. After getting off the phone, I immediately put his plan into action. The basement would have to be first, as I was still apprehensive about going upstairs. I set up the app and put my phone on the basement floor. I proceeded to ask questions, leaving enough space in between for someone or something to answer. I asked for normal things like its name, its age, and what it wanted. After roughly 5 minutes of interrogation, I stopped the recording and played it back. I must have listened to my own voice a million times, hoping for anything audible to present itself. To my dismay, I caught nothing of the sort. It seemed as though the attic would indeed have to be my next venture. I reluctantly climbed the stairs up to the attic door. I looked at it for a few moments, took a deep breath, and unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door and braced myself. There was nothing there, save for the previous owner's belongings. When I first purchased the house, I had to do a little bit of renovating, so to speak. The owner before me had no cable, electricity, or proper plumbing. On top of that, they left all of their stuff behind. I had most of it removed, but I left everything that was in the attic. I had no need for the space, and I didn't want to put any more money into emptying the house than I had to. I perused through the attic's wares for a bit, curious as to what it was that I technically owned. Some of the interesting items that stood out to me were an old postcard from Paris, a strange-looking dog collar, and a book on witchcraft. The fear set in while going through the contents of my new collection. The angled ceiling antiques and large window overlooking my yard did give the place a dose of charm, but I still didn't like attics. I quickly hit the record button on the app and set my phone on the floor. I asked the same questions as before, but didn't leave as much space in between, as I really wanted to get the hell out of there. Before stopping the recording, I had a thought. Perhaps the spirit would respond if I asked it the same question that I did in my sleep. I cleared my throat and asked, "Where are you?" After asking the final question, I stopped the recording and played it back. It sounded almost identical to the one I'd recorded in the basement, complete with a lack of answers. That is, until the very end. After I asked the last question, I heard a familiar, low whisper. "It's behind you." After hearing this reply, I immediately turned around. There was nothing there. Despite this, I hightailed it downstairs. That eerie voice reinforced my phobia of attics and instilled in me an indescribable dread. I could no longer bear to be in that house by myself. I called John again and begged him to help me out. I told him I'd give him the gas money for the 8-hour round trip. He was reluctant at first, knowing that he'd have to spend the night and call out of work the next morning. Curiosity got the best of him in the end. After much deliberation, he agreed to come over. I waited for John in my car. While sitting there, I couldn't help but examine my house. I began asking myself questions, like, is it really haunted? Do ghosts really exist? And my favorite, is this what my life has come to? Though the questions were speculative and rhetorical, I pretty much knew the answers. As I gazed towards the house in disappointment, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. It was a silhouette standing at the attic window. Holy shit. What the FK? What do I do? Those were the only thoughts that crossed my mind after seeing the shadowy figure. After a few moments of staring, the figure stepped back from the window, completely out of sight. I sat and pondered about it for a few minutes after its departure. In a moment of bravery, I chose to go back in the house and up to the attic. Crazy, I know, but it's my house, and I needed to show this thing that I wasn't interested in playing its games, even if I was scared shitless. Besides, John would have my head if I didn't follow the damn thing. Feeling confident, but still shaky, I ventured up into the attic. I swung the door open without hesitation and waltzed in like I owned the place. After all, I did. The attic was void of any ghostly figures, but it did harbor the faint scent of candle wax. Unsure of how to proceed, I started talking in a loud and firm tone. This isn't your house. I'm tired of your bullshit games. Spirit, I demand that you leave at once. I knew this wasn't going to work, but it was almost cathartic. I felt a hell of a lot better fighting back. I walked around the attic, satisfied with my rant, thinking that I had actually conquered my fear. My smug demeanor wouldn't last more than a few moments. Soon after I spoke, a gust of wind blew through the attic and hit me like a bus. He nearly knocked me over. I knew it was the ghost's doing. I tried to stand my ground, but I was pretty damn frightened. I watched as everything around me flew about, creating a tornado of mementos and keepsakes. I was about to retreat when I noticed something that hadn't budged an inch. It was the book on witchcraft that I'd seen before. Upon noticing it, the wind inexplicably stopped, and everything fell to the floor. I walked over to the book, curious as to why it remained stationary. As I did, it opened up on its own. It was startling, but I somehow sensed no malice. I was coming around to the fact that the ghost might really be trying to communicate with me. The page the book landed on was a spell. The whole thing was in Latin, but from what I could make out, it had something to do with growing plants. Confused, I reached out to the ghost for help. What do you want me to do? After asking the question, the attic door slammed shut. I thought for a moment and gathered that it wanted me to recite the spell in the attic. I was still confused, but somehow calm. It felt as though I was helping the spirit in some way. Before I could read from the book, my phone went off. It was a text from John. So sorry. I can't make it out there. My boss won't give me the day off tomorrow, and I'm not sure my car will make it there and back. It desperately needs new tires, and I won't be able to buy those until Friday. Give me a call back then, and I'll see what I can do. Good luck, FACK. Even though I wasn't freaking out anymore, it was nice knowing that someone was on their way to my house, just in case things went sour. I didn't like it, but I was on my own. I accepted this and turned my attention back to the book. It was time to deliver the spell. I cleared my throat and began reciting the text in the book. I took Latin in college, and although I didn't retain all the information, I knew enough to make the proper pronunciations. Even still, I stumbled over my words during certain parts. Because of this, I had to restart a couple of times. I wanted to get it right, especially if it was truly what the ghost wanted. Just after finishing the spell flawlessly, for the most part, the attic door opened. I walked out with the book in hand, wondering if everything was over. When I reached the bottom step and turned around the corner, it became quickly apparent that it wasn't. The basement door was wide open. I was in uncharted territory, taking orders from a ghost, but I hoped I was following along. All right, seeing the basement door ajar convinced me that I probably needed to recite the spell down there as well. I still wasn't sure why, but it felt like this was the spirit's will. As such, I obliged. I walked down into the basement with the book and turned the light on. A quick glance around revealed that I was alone and that there was no door. I cleared my throat once again and began reciting the spell, word for word. Honestly, I was a little excited. It felt like I was doing something productive about my ghost problem and that it might actually help put it to rest. This time, I got it right on the first try. Upon finishing the spell in the basement, the house began shaking. When I say the house, I mean the whole house, basement and all. I'd never experienced an earthquake before, but it seemed like the only logical explanation for what was happening. It wasn't until I looked around the room during the madness that I realized it was the spell's doing. There on the far wall, shaking with the rest of the house, was the attic door. I wondered if the spell had somehow summoned it, simultaneously causing the house to wobble. The tremor eventually stopped, and I was left with the door, lending credence to my theory. I waited for a few minutes, thinking the door would open, but it did not. It seemed that I would have to do that myself. I wasn't too happy about it, but I'd come too far to back out now. I gathered my wits and walked over to the door. I proceeded to swing it open without fear, just as I had upstairs. Behind the door there was a surprise. It was the attic. The attic is upstairs. Everything was the same, except there was a man standing at the window. Hearing me open the door, he turned around. His eyes widened when he saw me. He ran so fast in my direction that I didn't even have enough time to take more than a single step back. He rushed through the doorway and into the basement. He turned back around and slammed the attic door shut, making sure to lock the deadbolt. He turned to me, grabbed my shoulders, and looked me dead in the eye. I was baffled and scared for my life. Thank you so much. After expressing his thanks, the man let go of me and ran upstairs, but not before turning back around and offering me some advice. Whatever you do, don't go in there. He gestured toward the attic door before bolting upstairs. I ran after him, wanting to ask some questions, but when I got upstairs, it was already too late. My front door was open, and I could see him running down the dirt road towards town. And that was that. I've slept every night since then with no noises or paranormal issues whatsoever. I even set up the cameras and voice recorder a few times to make sure. They didn't catch a damn thing. I don't know what the hell happened, but I am sure of one thing. The man that came out from behind the attic door was no ghost. It was a living, breathing person.